this was a topic that was very difficult for me uh, because I haven't really thought much about indigenous innovation, and especially even though I have been a researcher in India, I'm at Microsoft, so it's been pretty comfortable, and I've been just doing the research, right, and thinking about different topics. So what I'm going to say, take it with a grain of salt. I think these are just some initial thoughts that I've put together, especially for this panel. Uh, I think as I reflect on the projects I've done, uh, a common theme that I see is that if you're doing research in India, uh, compared to the world hubs, let's say in the US, you probably have less resources and you probably also have a lower density of talent. And so in these couple of slides, I just reflect back on the projects I've done and see if there's any kind of a recipe, right? If there's something that we can do where we can lead the world while still acknowledging that we will not have that kind of capital. And most likely, we may not also have the density of talent that global hubs have. So I'll talk about my experience first. And of course, when I was doing all these projects, I had no idea of leading the world or low resources, anything like that. I had just come back from the US. I joined Microsoft Research. This was about 2017. And I was thinking about uh, what problems that I could solve once I'm back in India, right? Uh, and my background was in causal inference. So it's a field of machine learning and also statistics that looks at how do you estimate the causal effect of interventions. Right? So you can think of it as some online system that does some kind of new A/B test, or it does a new feature and they want to know how good that feature is. Or you can also think more classically drug treatments, economic policies, and people just want to know if you do this action, how much good the outcome would be. Right? So you can think of it as a very challenging machine learning or statistical problem. But as I came to India, I realized that I cannot play that game. So when I was in the US, I was building algorithms. I was building methods that would solve this problem. Right? That's what you would do typically if someone presents this problem to you as a PhD student. But I realized that once I'm back in India, I can no longer go to the conferences. And in this field at that time, I think the US was the center, right? Especially eastern part of the US was the center. People would take car rides or plane flights, 2-hour plane flights, go talk to their colleagues, spread the word about the methods, and so on, right? And I would realize that if I'm now here, and interestingly, I was the only person here in causal inference, at least in the subfield that I was in, I was the only person in India. I realized I could not do that, right? Even if I build the best methods, I would not have the capability to socialize the method. I would not have the capability to meet other people who are working on similar methods, and so on. And so what I instead did, at the time it just made sense, was I tried to see that there are many people building methods, but the issue is verification. Because in causal effect, like you have to verify to some extent what predictions you're making, right? For example, if an economist is giving an advice to a head of state, it has to be based on causal inference, but hopefully you would hope that there are also some validation checks, many verifications that have been done. But at the time in the field, it was quite scattered, right? People were not really doing at least a standardized way of validation. Every researcher had their own kind of methods, right? So what I eventually ended up doing was just a very simple thing, which was how do you standardize the assumptions across fields and build a platform that helps people do that analysis and verify it as well, right? So I added some initial verifiers, but ultimately it became a platform where many different people would add verifiers to that platform. But I think the insight was just a very simple insight that let's just standardize the assumptions that many of these researchers are making, but that's not being translated to real use. I think of course, after that, the platform took off. I think there were lots of installations right now. Through some good luck, I think it's one of the most popular platforms for causal inference around the world, both for industry and academia. But I think looking back, it was really something that I could do which had a leverage in the sense that once I make the platform, more people can come to the platform and as well as more people researchers can add verifiers, and so on. Another problem that I tackled, especially because I was in India and I had this excellent group of people around me in Microsoft Research who were tackling problems in India, right, through technology. So I fixated on mental health. And again, the same pattern, right? So the problem was, it's rarely talked about. Most people reach a counselor too late. But again, I mean, sitting in Microsoft Research, even though we were collaborating with Nimhans, it's very unlikely that we would be able to attack the core problem of mental health or make some real big progress in that, right? And so again, the sub-problem we picked was just connecting people to counselors in India and connecting them in the local language that they would be comfortable with, right? And again, there were lots of global companies, lots of Indian companies also, which were building mental health apps, but they were all in English, right? And so I think here our solution was simply an app-based platform that works in local languages. And because of the fact we were able to fine-tune our system for the local affordances, of course, with help from Nimhans as well, we found that this platform was also appreciated by many users in India. So the reflection that I have looking back is that doing research in India has some amazing advantages. You get exposed to some real problems, and you also get exposed to colleagues from a lot of different backgrounds, right? But what we don't have is large amount of resources, again, compared to the US or China, right? We obviously have good resources. So my thesis is that instead of a field's core, so imagine like your research field, there's a core, and there are lots of people who are actively trying to solve that problem around the world. But often there's also a periphery, which are problems that the core somehow, for whatever reason, does not want to do. But if someone solves them, they'll be very happy, right? So this was kind of the do-I thing. Nobody wanted to build a platform. But once a platform existed, everyone was happy to contribut. Or I think there are problems that possibly are useful for the general public. The field's research would not appreciate it. But I think if you do that well, then you gain credibility in the field. And then maybe you can work on problems that are more in the core, right? So that's what's the thesis I like to put for this discussion. I feel that especially if you are doing kind of indigenous research, if you're starting off thinking of new research direction or a new lab, spend a lot of time thinking about the problem. If you can find a problem that's valued by the people in core and also is useful for the real world, that would be amazing. I have never, in my career so far, I have not been able to find such a problem. But the real push is that over time, if you build competence in the periphery, it will lead to opportunities, resources, money, people coming to you so that you can actually now attack problems in the core as well. And just if you apply this for AI research, that's what my field is. I think, again, the good problems for indigenous research in India may not be building the core, which is the large general AI model. At least I wouldn't directly go there if I was starting today. And the same reasons, like input is limited, capital, low density of talent. Instead, I was asked the question, what can we do that is not capital intensive and also does not require hundreds of people to start? So this could be small models, which are applicable for the real world, creating data exchanges. We heard very interesting talks about data exchanges, which would be both valuable for the large general model, because people who are building models often require data to train, and it would also be applicable to the general public, because the general public would get money to give that data. And then you can also imagine local language adaptations or building verifiers. I'll stop there.
Thanks, Amit. I think that's those are very interesting insights, and I'm sure we'll have time to discuss this in a bit. Next, I'd like to invite Dr. Gurumurthy, who's the head of the Foundation for Science, Innovation, and Development at the Indigenous of Science, and grapples with this problem of indigenous innovation on a daily basis. So, Professor Gurumurthy, if you could just take a few minutes and walk us through your lived experiences.
Sure. Thank you, Kapil. I don't have slides, so I'm just going to speak, and you can time me and cut me when I'm done. Good afternoon. So I'm a faculty here in the Institute of Science, but I'm here because, as Kapil mentioned, I happen to head the Foundation for Science. Can I sit down? Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Appreciate it. Yeah. I happen to lead the Foundation for Science, Innovation and Development. The chaos figure there that looks like a butterfly, that's us. The Indian Institute of Science started this a while ago, initially as a society, and then we became a not-for-profit Section 8 company with 3 goals. One was outreach to industry, primarily for collaborative research, long-term research. What we do there is 2 things with the industry. One, of course, is engage with them on research problems, which are executed by faculty of the Institute of Science. And I must say that we have been quite successful in that, because today, at any given time, there will be over 150 projects going on the campus, funded entirely by industry. And if you look at the spread, both in terms of the geography of the companies that engage with us, as well as the domains in which they engage with us, it's across the entire world and across the spectrum from science to engineering. Which is also because we are in the Institute of Science. An institute has, though it has only science in its name, it has a very strong engineering faculty as well, even if I say it myself. But we do, trust me. So that's one that we do, and I think this is an area where we think there is more action possible, and we are hoping that this activity will continue to grow. The second thing that we do with large companies is that enable them to establish labs on campus. And there are 2 kinds of labs that companies can establish. One, which they man themselves, and follow their own technology or product roadmap. But we expect them to take advantage of the proximity with the institute and interact more deeply with faculty, students, and the labs that are there on the other side of the campus. We were constrained by space for a while, and so that number was always between 6 to 8. But now, in the next year, we hope by March we will hit probably 20, and we'll try to grow that even more, right? And again, here the spectrum is from science to engineering and across the world. The other kind of lab that some companies choose to establish is where they provide the resources, both financial as well as physical, and participate in the governance of the lab, meaning they identify problems of interest or research that needs to be done in the lab, but execution is done primarily by faculty of the II Institute, but we do bring in faculty from other institutes as well. Right? And again, there are about 8 or so of these labs right now on campus, and again, the expectation is that this will continue to grow. So that's the first kind of activity that we do, and we do see large advantages in engaging with the industry. Primarily in terms of calibration of the research that gets done here, and also the fact that it gives us credibility in the eyes of the government projects, because increasingly the government is also pushing us to engage with industry in research. The second thing that we do in FSID is we work with the small and medium sector of the country to incubate technology in these companies. The idea being that if you look at the numbers, the SME sector, just by number of companies and percentage with the overall industry, is the same as it is in South Korea and Germany. But if you look at the contribution to manufacturing GDP, we are at 50%. And one of the theory or hypotheses is that it is because they are mostly doing contract manufacturing and not much indigenous technology-based product manufacturing. And so we engage with this sector to try and match them with colleagues here who have technologies that can be converted to products. And we then work with these SMEs, provide them product engineering capabilities and product management capabilities, and hopefully build products that they can then launch. We have done multiple cohorts so far, and beginner's luck has been good. In the first cohort, out of 8, 4 were in the market and making revenues. The remaining 4 also will succeed. The other ones are still work in progress, so more to report later. The third activity that we do in FSID is incubation. And our mandate is to incubate what we call deep science startups. And our definition of deep science is that the offering of the company is based on science. Not that they use science for doing something else, but the offering itself is based on science. And as we speak today, we have about 140 companies in our portfolio, and we don't have a unicorn yet, which is a refrain from my director as to where is the unicorn, and we say it is coming, but we don't have one yet. But we are quite pleased with the companies we have, and we are hoping that there will be some public successes. We do have successes, but some really public successes are still yet to come. Again, here we are agnostic to both the domain of the company as well as the origin of the founder. So if you look at the 140 companies that we have, more than 45% of the companies are founded by people who had no connection with the institute till they came to us. And about 35% is by faculty of the institute. And alumni is actually the weakest link, and that's something that we are trying to work on. Our own alumni don't come back and start companies. We don't allow them to start companies while they are students here, primarily because they are in government scholarship. And so we don't want them to sort of drop out, after having taken this opportunity. While we have this running, call for founders, which is how we get these 140 startups, we also have some thematic incubators, primarily because there were agencies that were willing to put money into that. The government of Karnataka actually has given us funds to establish two, one in the area of nanoscience technologies and devices, in sense, and the other one in the area of geriatric healthcare, which is run in one of the departments of the Institute of Science. We also have some funding from MIT, actually quite large funding from MIT, to establish what they call the ecosystem for gallium nitride, space innovation, where a small fab has been established, and today there are about 4 startups now, actually 3 startups and 1 EIR, hopefully will convert to a startup, which is looking at gallium nitride, primarily for the RF domain. We hope to see some companies in the power electronics domain shortly. Right? And the government of Karnataka again has given us some money for quantum technologies. We have a quantum research park that we run, and where we have 3 companies now, and we are hoping that that number will also grow as we go ahead. We also do some cohort-based programs for large corporates, where the intent is that at the end of it, the startups which can either be incubated by the corporate venture arm or by us or jointly. Mixed results so far. We've had one big success as a co-incubation with Bosch, and so there are some others that are brewing, but verdict is out yet. The fourth bucket of activities that we have is what we call SEED, which is to look at how science and engineering can intervene, to provide meaningful livelihoods for people in what is commonly called bottom of pyramid, basically the less developed communities and areas of the country. And here the intent is to sort of see if we can provide them some technology that can be converted into a product that can, give them more than just livelihood. One example I would like to leave you with, which is, we have a campus near Chitradurga in Chalakere, and it used to be a big sheep rearing area. And unfortunately, like everything else in India, coal and rare earth minerals, the yield is very poor, and the quality of the wool is also not very good, right? And so a lot of it is wasted. And so we looked at technologies in the campus, and there was a colleague who had looked at extracting keratin out of this wool. And so now we are trying to build a plant in that area in the hope that we can, process that waste and create something that is industrially valuable. And also see if the local youth there can, participate in this activity and, do something meaningful. We are looking out for similar technologies. There's another one on purification of water from ammonia and other such waste, and that is useful because a lot of people do fishery in stagnant ponds there, and the throughput sort of comes down very quickly because of the pollution that gets retained in the water. And so we have now tried this technology out of the lab in the campus there, and it seems to work. And again, if that clicks too, so we would look for more such technology. So that's pretty much what we do. And the last one that I need to mention is that we also engage in what we call translational research. And this we do either with faculty colleagues, I mean, definitely with faculty colleagues, but in a consortium with either government funding or industry funding. And CDPG, which is organizing this event, and its forerunner, the IUDX, is a very classic and a shining example of that activity, where research done in the institute sort of then gets scaled up through, translating it into the real world at some scale, and hopefully then there are ventures that will take it forward. And so data exchange is one activity. We are doing another one in energy storage and one in high-speed rotating machinery and in additive manufacturing. And we are very keen on venturing forth in multiple areas of strategic interest in this mode, because there is capability in the industry and there is capability here in academia, and our role we see is to sort of bring them together for some common goal. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you. That is very interesting, and I'm sure we'll talk more around some of these topics. So next on the panel is Nishant Chinda. He's the Director of Policy Research at the Indian School of Business. He's interested in issues to do with technology policy, competition and regulation in the digital economy as a whole. And I'll give Nishant a few minutes, Nishant, to introduce himself and his work.
So, I'll obviously have to do something different, because till now you've heard from people who actually played. I'm like a bad version of Harsha Bhogle, because I actually don't play, right? So I don't innovate. Right. So, but I do. But hopefully, like Harsha Bhogle, sometimes you get decent insight even when you are not playing yourself, right? So that's my job. I'm an economist by training. And I study innovation and technologies and the policy around it. But okay, so I think, and by training, we nitpick. That's what we are taught to do. So everything you put on. So for example, if you ask me what indigenous innovation is, Amit said he doesn't know it. I also don't know it, but I don't know it in two ways, because I don't know what indigenous is. But you have to, because, for example, if Microsoft sets up a lab, or Microsoft, we saw a real example, works with the Maharashtra government to develop a small language model, is that indigenous innovation? I don't know. So you have to tell me what indigenous is, right? You want to do something. Do you want to build capacity in India? That would be okay, right? Any Indian who then works, innovating something, learns something, teaches something to others around them, that has spillover effects. Do you want to keep the money that comes out of that innovation in India? That's very different. That Microsoft doing innovation is not indigenous, right? Because Microsoft's primary shareholders are not Indian. So the dividend goes to them, which means we don't get it. Right? So therefore, it's important to ask questions. So I don't know what indigenous is. I also don't know what innovation is. So if I ask you, currently is India an innovative society? Let me ask that question. We'll make it easier. We'll do three categories: good, bad, ugly. For reference, we'll say US is good, right? I think that we can probably all agree on. So we will do that. Maybe people don't agree on it, but let's start with that, right? So the US is a good category. So who thinks we are innovative enough, and which category should we go in? Or not? I mean, that's the question. I don't know. So just somebody has a thought on whether we are in the good, bad, or ugly category? Great, good, or bad category? Good. Okay. So okay, let's do a show of hands. Great. Let's start with great. All right. Good. Fair enough. Bad. Okay. So not so good. Okay, we'll introduce. So not so good. Right? But that's a real problem, right? Because I think it depends on what you define by innovation. I don't know. I'll do what economists usually do in a couple of minutes. But before that, I think we should ask ourselves what we mean by innovation, right? So why, for example, why would you want a foundational model in India? If I can get something of good quality at affordable prices from a provider that is outside of India, why are we racing? And because that's a wasted effort, isn't it? If two people develop the same vaccine, but only one wins, the other effort is wasted. But we accept it because innovation usually is a race. We are all building towards the same thing. That's actually, if you've seen the buzz 2 days ago, that's kind of the corollary of the Schumpeter hypothesis, right? So you will have to invest that, but only there'll be one winner. But that prize is what motivates innovation. So fair enough. But if somebody's already done it, do we want to do it, right? And the question is, why are we asking this question? But I mean, so why is an institute asking this question, right? So if innovation is being done for commercial purposes, let businesses ask that question. If they don't want to do it, they don't do it. Why are we getting into it? So, right, so I think we have to ask difficult questions to get the right answers. So I actually don't know what innovation is. Now, I do put India in the not so great innovation category, but I have my reasons for it, right? So, but before I go to the bad news again, I thought I'll give you some, at least I think what is some good news. So this is, some very, very recent work we've been doing. I mean, the idea is we did more, but I'm presenting something here for what works for today. So we've been trying to look at patents in India, doing some textual analysis on them, trying to understand what kind of patents do we come out with. But the good news is we actually don't do very bad, right? So this is, this is just the number of patents by domestic inventors. So these are patents filed by innovators working in India. Doesn't necessarily mean that they are for Indian organizations, but these are innovators working in India, right? So, so it looks good, right? Because convex curves are always very good, right? They suddenly rise up. The problem is always the scale, right? So if I put China on this, you won't actually see this curve, because you'll only see China's curve. And China is one country which we love to hate and hate to love, right? Because we love following China, but we hate it with all our being. But we emulate it because for some strange reason we do like it. It has some good, we shouldn't emulate it, but I think there's good things to learn from them. Right, so so we're not doing that bad. And especially, in the recent years, I think there's been a huge increase in patenting activity in India. And I think it's partly also because of the efforts that have been put in trying to educate the population of what it means to, commercialize technologies. And when I said, I don't know what innovation is, as an economist, that's the key thing to me. Innovation is different from discovery, right? Innovation is essentially tied to commercialization. If you cannot commercialize it, that is not innovative. It's innovative in the English sense. It's something new. But discovery, therefore, is different than commercialization. And I don't think we are bad at discovery. We have a low density in discovery. And obviously, density matters. I think we are worse at commercialization. But that also means we don't choose things that will sell. So that is a critical part. See, doing business, and Dr. Gurumurthy was pointing it out, doing business, selling things is an essential part of innovating, because then you'll be noticed. Otherwise, you can do something, and that is true. Basics, the US is also way ahead in basic science. I'm not talking about that here. But, so those are two different things. What is also good is that if you look at the spread, so research is almost always concentrated, right? It requires research because you need people to come together. So there's agglomeration effects. And so we've actually done quite well. We've got a lot of new, so these are pin codes. These small things you see on the map are pin codes. Or districts, I think districts. So we've got lots of new geographies where innovators are, and that's good because innovation has spillovers. So every failed innovator is actually great for society, not as great as if they would have succeeded, obviously. So I'm not saying it's great to fail, but I'm saying it's okay to fail. Because when because that research has spillovers, and some of the spillovers don't always come from success. Some of the spillovers come from the fact that somebody left penicillin overnight and it became penicillin, right? So, so those are not just apocryphal stories. So this is important, right? So I think that very quickly, since I think I was asked to do a policy thing, I'll just take two more slides on that. But I came late in the morning, so I've seen 4 presentations over the course of the day. So now I know it's data for public good, but everything I saw and I heard is basically public innovation, meaning the public, it's either public funding, and in most cases, it's public funding and public servants who are innovating, which means where you are paid for, because IISc faculty are paid for by public funds, I'm assuming, yes. I am not, but yeah. So this is, right, so what I'm trying to say is that, I think it's one easy way to say it. So in most countries, including China, innovation is never primarily done by public organizations, including universities. We hear a lot about US universities, but if I show you a chart, unfortunately I don't have it here, if I plot private enterprise patents and high universities, you won't see the high university chart. The scale is so small. Universities in the US do basic funding, basic science, they get money for that, they do basic science. Commercialization, which is development, is done outside. And the US is unique because for the past about 3.5 decades, they don't even fund their research publicly primarily. So US research is primarily funded and conducted outside government, right? What they do fund is they save their money, and despite what the current president is doing, they still keep supporting basic research because that has no commercial value. See, the thing is you cannot make money from a math equation. So somebody, however, has to fund that math equation because without that equation, you can't build anything else. But why would you pay for it if I can't get money out of it, right? I'm a private citizen. Some people do it, of course, but not, so you do want to do it. So the point is, we need to find our, ways to increase private activity in innovation. We have to do it in both funding and where it is conducted. Research, all of this is even now primarily conducted by universities. 60% of these patents are coming from universities, which is terrible because most of these patents will never be commercialized. They can't be, right? Because they don't know what they're working on. Most faculty don't know what they're working on. They've never stepped foot outside the department. So they'll do something, they'll do it, they'll get it patented, but they have no idea how to commercialize it. So I think that is one thing that we need to do. And so the last thing is, and I'm going to end with something, there's a lot of things we can talk about, but if you want and if you have time, we can come back to it. I'm going to leave with one thing, which is so fundamental that we don't think about it. I think we cannot be a good or a great innovating nation because we just don't have basic. See, the thing is, we think so much about high-end human resource, right? We think about H-1B visas, and we think about a few thousand of people who will be affected. What we forget is research is a collaborative effort. You can be a great scientist, but if everybody else you are leading in the lab has no basic sense of how to conduct a lab research, there's nothing you can do. That was part of what Amit was talking about. There is very low density, right? And this, so this is, you'll see the stark difference when I show you how you actually plan research. By the way, this is not just true about China. The map is China. So you'll see that when I put them on the same scale, you'll see how it looks. But this solid line is tertiary education. This is nothing to do with innovation. This is just the share of population with some post-secondary education, okay? Look at where China's curve is right now. The solid curve, that's about 70% of the population. That's gross enrollment, meaning that of all the people in the age group 18 to 24, what proportion have tertiary education? Because that's the age appropriate education, right? So that's 70%. In Korea, this is 106, and this is the reason it's higher than 100 is because people who are not in the appropriate age are also getting post-secondary before they actually enter 18, right? And Korea is, by the way, the recent statistics, it's after Sweden, the most innovative country in the world because you do 8 patents per population, right? So it's a very small country, but it's a very high density of patents. Samsung and Hyundai contribute a lot to it, but still. And you see the thing so that's India. And in India, this is 30. Okay? And obviously the patents are low as well. But you'll see something which is stark here. I'll go to the next one and then come back. एक और पूरा कर दीजिए एक और Next. Next. नहीं है क्या? Oh, sorry, I forgot. Okay, so then can I go back? Sorry. So if you see what happens is, I had a so if you do do some basic stats and see when the curves take off, what you'll find is that the break in the tertiary education line is before 2000, and the line is flat on patenting. They really take off after the population starts getting ready. And that is true for every country. Before Korea started patenting about 40 years ago, 80% of the population had post-secondary education. In the US, this number has constantly been around 90, right? Forever. They did this after the war. So one of the things, for example, the US did is we do so much. They had this, I don't know if you've seen World War II movies, if you're a fan of them. They had this GI scholarships. If you fought in the war, the government would pay for you to go to college, but only college. So you had to, see the thing is, you can do subsidies, but you want to tie them to a social purpose, right? It's not everybody's money. You can't just go around wasting it. So I think that those are the things that, so we have some very fundamental, very, very fundamental problems in the way we approach some of these things. Unless we can fix those, we are not going to be able to innovate at scale. It's just one last thing, and so you talked about, for example, the SME sector. In manufacturing, only about 15% of the all manufacturing small units in India actually have a computer. Only about 26% have used the internet, probably through the mobile and stuff. You're not educated, you don't have, who are we going to build for? It's great to say we're going to build for India, but who? We've got to sell to people. No, innovation for India means we've got to sell to them. So I'm going to leave, sorry. So I think it's good to be a dampener on spirits sometimes, but you are forced to ask questions. But I think these are some things we need to ask. We are doing well, but I don't think we'll do better than this unless we get some significant changes going. Right? So that would be my pitch. Sorry, I took a little bit more.
No. That was worth the time. Thanks a lot. Thank you. And we'll come back to some of these questions. So last on the panel is Srinivas Kadapa from one of the leading breakthrough institutions in the country, the Center for Brain Research. Srinivas.
Well, I'm a last moment addition to this. Thanks, Kapil, for putting me on the spot, literally. This is quite interesting. In the context of innovation, Amit talks about what? Professor Gurumurthy talked about how, one of the methods of how. Nishant Chadha talks about why. Why in the negative sense to quite an extent, to stay with your spirit of being the dampener. But we need to recognize mistakes, right? Otherwise, how are we going to grow? So there are two other W's, right? When and by who. So maybe I'll try to take those two, which happen to be relevant to what I do at CBR. Okay, and pardon me because I'm literally winging it here. I didn't prepare anything at all, so I'm spouting off the top of my head. So when? Why not now? Right? Nishant asked an important question, which is, where are we on the innovation spectrum? My feeling is we are good, but that comes from a perspective of you look at, and I'm not talking about innovation in the typical sense. See, we tend to measure, be honest with me, we tend to measure innovation by what the US has done, what China is doing, what the Western world is doing, etc. Right? But I'm saying that we are good from the Indian perspective. Jugaad, man. Okay? We are the best on the planet at Jugaad. I don't think we can counter that. Okay? That to me is innovation. People solve small problems that they need to solve. They have always been doing it. We need to scale that Jugaad up in a certain way because we need to do a lot more with a lot less. But there are some important people about, so that's a common person who does jugaad, right? And no matter the level of schooling or education. Actually, I think they are very well educated. They may not be very well schooled, but they are very well educated because they know how to go around things. And these are two different things, right? Schooling and education. Now, by who? Here, thanks for giving me this opportunity. Shameless plug for CBR and how this is being done. Okay. How many of you are aware of CBR as an organization? Show of hands, quick show of hands. Okay. Do you know who funded it? Do you know who founded it? That's right. Chris Gopalakrishnan, who was one of the co-founders of Infi, cha-ching over the years, right? As Infi did very well, all of them made out big time. And Chris is incredibly altruistically minded. Okay, he's put his money in lots of places. CBR happens to be one of those. He could have decided to put his money into cancer research or something else, right? But those are the things that catch your attention. But what Chris did is decided to put his money into trying to solve the problem of neurodegeneration in the aging brain in the Indian context, because as a country, by way of demographics, we are going to have north of 200 to 300 million people. 300 million people. Just for the record, the population of the US is about 330, 340 million. Okay. By mid 2040s, who are 60 plus years old. Okay. Even if a small percentage of this number goes towards neurodegenerative problems, imagine the multiplicative negative effect it has on the community around them, on their near and dear. So it is now a known fact, I don't know how widely known though, that the cost of care for neurodegeneration is multiple times that of something like cancer. Okay, so he's decided to put his money into this. Okay, private. Somebody who made out very well has decided to put his money into this, and he is doing a lot of work attracting other very wealthy people from around the planet. Gates Ventures, for instance, who's sent quite a bit of funding our way to solve this problem. And what are we going to do with it? Are we going to commercialize it? No. The intent is entirely altruistic, is to give it out to the scientific and clinical community around. Hopefully we are able to do that kind of work in CBR as a nodal center, but it's not just CBR. We are going to do this together with a whole bunch of people, thanks to CDPG and IISc, and a few other institutions around. We have talked about NIMHANS, we have talked about, I mentioned Gates Ventures. There are quite a few other institutions around the planet as well who think CBR is an extremely unique effort of its kind to solve this problem, and give it to them and say, use this, go help your patients, dear Mr. Clinician or Mrs. Clinician, go please use this, help find out, help predict whether any of your patients is at potential risk of neurodegeneration. Okay, so if we can do that, we can hopefully offer them remedial interventions that may either arrest it or maybe delay it to a much, much later stage in life, right? Now, is this a combination of innovation and discovery? Probably both. This is a very hard problem, not being solved anywhere, but what do you know? We are doing this in India, right here on campus. CBR is 3 buildings away, 2 buildings away from IUDX, from CDPG, okay? This is a collaborative effort. So this is a kind of work that last year when I came back to India after 33 years in the US, and I came back here and I met my good friend Professor KVS Hari, who happens to be the director of CBR, and he said, I need someone to do this. I said, let me do it, I'm here, I will take this up. And I started it. 3 months later, I said, Hari, I'm committed to this, I'm never going back to the corporate world again. Okay? Now, this kind of an opportunity, I'm just grateful and privileged that it landed in my lap. But this is the kind of stuff that we need to do, and I'd like to attract lots of the folks like you, youngsters, experienced people to come and work towards this kind of a problem. Now, this is funded, reasonably well funded, but we need lots of hands helping us in this effort. This is a serious opportunity for innovation, okay, and discovery. This is not a solved problem. It's a combination of neuroscience, biology, cognition, psychiatry, computational techniques. So I myself had the data and AI effort at CBR, okay, but I'm just so, I can't count my blessings that I'm in a place where I get to work with all of these scientists and try to solve a problem like this. Whether it even happens in my lifetime or not, I don't care. My objective is to try it. But the intent is that if we make some progress towards this and put this out into the world, in India and hopefully to the world, then we would have made a serious contribution to humanity, right? Opportunity at innovation. There was one more topic, I'll quickly address it and then I'll move on. This has to do with something that Amit mentioned, and yesterday there was a panel discussion, late evening panel discussion on Indian knowledge systems in the age of AI. I would like to think about it more, replace the I from Indian to indigenous, because there are indigenous populations around the planet who had tremendous amounts of knowledge that were not encoded in words, written, maybe spoken, but there were lots of things in thought. For instance, knowledge of climate, knowledge of weather. The farmers' pictures that Amit was showing a while ago. Vikas Kanungo. Right. Those are people who, through past knowledge that's been passed on through the generations, they know how, they can look at things and figure things out, right? How do you think a bar-tailed godwit takes a 10,000 mile something migration over the planet despite it being a small bird and having a brain, maybe this size? There is so much that is out there, and there is so much that people know that is not encoded into words, figures, writing. But how do we use this how do we find ways to encode this knowledge and extract the juice out of it? Here is where we really need to try things out. And you know what? It's not a question of how many GPUs you can throw at this problem. First, you need to figure out how to structure this data. Okay, that will be an innovative effort. That will also be a point, a big problem of discovery if we can do that. Try and find ways. These are questions that I'm just, tabling out here. So try and find ways to solve all of these kinds of problems as a community. We are here, at this awesome data symposium. This is my second time being here, and I don't think I'm going to miss this. I'm going to keep coming back here because I intend to stay at CBR for as long as I can. So you folks, the youngsters, the experienced people, all of you here, come join this effort. Figure out what innovation means in the Indian context. It is true, and I agree with Nishant Chadha's opinion here that innovation by definition has a commercial angle to it, but discovery need not. And we are in this place. We happen to be in this position where we have an opportunity for both discovery and innovation, small or big, it doesn't matter. Go for even small wins that are far more relevant in the Indian context. We don't necessarily need the big large language model. Somebody has already done it. Good, more power to them, that's fine. But if we can find problems that we can solve in the Indian context that are more useful to us without the kind of information that OpenAI and Meta and all just sucked up from everywhere, good for us. We should do this.
Thanks, Srinivas. Please take a seat. Yeah. So I don't know how much time we have. Do we have like 10 minutes? Can we get 10 minutes? All right. So this was incredibly useful. I think this, I'm sure all of us, we've learned a lot from this discussion. I did want to add, to try and address this question of innovation and the definition of innovation, right? And I think, at least in my mind, there are these three maybe categories, maybe there are more, but there is this disruptive innovation, right? Where you are in a field and you have innovation that can completely disrupt and change the worldview of that field. This is, I think, maybe core to what Amit was showing as the field core, right? Then there is this reverse innovation or cost reverse innovation, frugal innovation that you spoke about. And then there is diffusion innovation, right? So the ability to take technology and diffuse it at scale. And I think we are probably good at some of these, but I would say that at least in the very disruptive part, the core, I think is where we lack. So I think my first question to all of you, and please feel to answer, is that what kind of disruptive innovation, what limits us from doing more of that disruptive innovation? Should we do it or not? What limits us in doing it? And also we've seen, at least in the last couple of years, we've seen some national missions by the government, National Quantum Mission, National AI Mission, National Semiconductor Mission, that are directly targeting some of these areas where we eventually feel that we want to be disruptive. And what is the role these national missions play in the space of encouraging this kind of disruptive innovation? Any one of you who may have thoughts on this?
Thanks. Well, I don't know. See, I would think that you would probably first need something to disrupt, right, for the meaning to be true. Okay, let me address, I think, this indirectly, and I'll, by giving you, the example of a sector which I think in India actually is disruptive, which is finance. Because I think one of the things which is, I think people who are in finance talk about it, but it's not very well known that how easy it is. For example, we have seen a lot of growth in capital markets, right, deepening. And that's primarily because of Zerodha and Grow and others, right? Because it used to be a very closed sector. It's difficult to get in for a retail customer. Of course, it's helped with the fact that we're getting richer. So I don't know which one it is. But I think that, there is, so they have kind of taken advantage of a lot of these things. So if any of you, I'm sure some of you do, if you do invest, if you want to move, for example, from one provider to another, you can do it in seconds. You see, because one of the things, this is interoperability by regulation. We talk about interoperability in technology endlessly, but interoperability is not about technology. It's about some critical information moving from one place to another. So it's actually more than that. And interoperability in finance is coded in law. So the Indian capital markets requires that the information you have of your investments in capital markets is not maintained with brokers, which is what the US does. In India, after Harshad Mehta, that regulation required that it be maintained, and you will get emails from NDSL and CDSL, which are the two repositories where this data is maintained. But that's by law. Technology just sits on top of it. So one thing is that because I am not entirely tied to technology, since I don't do it, I think we often fail to reflect that technology depends on how you think about it, it's an intermediary. It's a layer. We don't consume technology. We don't consume things that technology brings us, especially digital technologies. We still consume the same things, right? We eat, we sleep, we do a bunch of other things. All of those it does create new products. For example, we have online news we never had before, but, So what I would think is that a lot of these, and something that is talking about, I do think that there is value to thinking about a lot of these things as infrastructure. And I think if something can be considered infrastructure, there is no reason why the public should not invest in it, right? Because it has value. You can think about basic science the same way. It's just that basic science creates, or discovery or research, is hard to, the returns from it creates huge value, but you can't appropriate it, right? And the problem with incentives is if I can't make money, and I'm not saying you want to be a billionaire, but everybody wants to be paid well for something they are doing. It's a very fundamental human requirement, right? If you write, you publish a paper, you want people to read it, you want people to appreciate it. You have the right incentives. So I think that these missions and in India, we have a special sort of, we do have a problem where funding for research is limited because of where we are, because of where, sometimes our mindsets. And I say mindsets because one thing that happened, for example, the past 20 years is Indian corporates, firms, real wages have not increased, which means you don't pay people more. What you do is profits have gone up, like tremendously, but that money never comes back. So it's not a problem of money. It's just that we don't invest it in India. We invest in India in real estate, right? We don't invest it in, you won't give it to a lab. You won't set up a lab. You won't do it, research in-house. So there are issues, again, I don't want to go on a rant about it, but I think that therefore the public's cutting in, creating some of these things, maybe creating labs, which then say, fine, we'll do this research, and we'll, you take the research and go ahead and commercialize it and do what you want with it. So, and that's the same thing I think about these public layers of data that we are building. So to me, I think it's a great idea. But is that alone going to we become innovative because of that? No, because those are just layers. Somebody has to do something on that, right? So I can do a great thing. I can build a great road. But somebody else has to build the cars that will run on it, whether you build a Ferrari or whether you build an Ambassador. That's the choice that you have, right? Some people go for a Ferrari and stick to it. If you can't make a Ferrari first time, they'll do it a second time. I think that's the mindset that you were talking about. I think that's required. You've got to stick to what you want to do.
I know, Amit, you had some thoughts on this.
Yeah, I'll probably just say that I think given the resources we have, innovation would require having strong discovery, having the innovators, and possibly also the scalers around on that same area, same geography. Even though internet is there, surprisingly, geography still matters a lot, like the density that I was talking about. So in that way, I think I appreciate the missions because we probably have to choose, right? I think we cannot, perhaps as a country, right, invest in many different areas and hope that we'll become the best. So in that way, I think it makes sense that someone makes a decision. Of course, that is a hard decision itself. But once you've made a decision, this is the mission, then hopefully there's a chance that we can create the ecosystem around that technology. So that should increase our chances.
Yeah, so, yeah.
So I just wanted to say one thing about the missions, which is, I think they are needed. What they do for innovation, okay, fine, time will tell. But they do serve to increase what we call the design space in the country. Meaning that it exposes the country and creates capability in the country in spaces that we were not hitherto in. The LCA is a classic example, the Light Combat Aircraft. When it was originally designed, it was designed to be an all-composite aircraft, and we had no capability in composite materials at the time. Right? So in that sense, it was a very dumb design decision. As a corporate, nobody would have made that decision. But as a country, it was a smart thing to do because it pushed the whole country, at least the relevant sections in the country, to look at that technology, look at avionics. And today, we have immense capabilities in those space. So I think that's something, a good reason for us to invest in these missions. And, like he said, what comes of it, fine. It depends on the individual brilliance at each of these things. So that's okay. The other thing I just want to mention is not related to this, but some of the discussions that has been going on is that, what you mentioned about disruptive is that somebody does some science and somebody is able to spot an opportunity in that science, right? That will take time because we have to do much more science before people start, looking. There must be enough funnel that people do this. So that will take time, and I think we should be confident. But the other thing is to solve the problems of here and now, and that's probably what he also alluded to, is that I sit in a lab, I don't even know what is going on in the country, what capabilities are in the country, and I'm solving some problem because somebody else had published this paper in the journal, and I have a skill set that can, exploit that problem. So that's not a good way to do research. I think so that is something, if these missions can change, that's also a good plus, that you are solving a problem of immediate relevance to the environs around us and do that. But that doesn't mean that, we should stop the people who are looking at blue sky science, and that also has its role. But innovation, I think these two things are important.
Yeah, that's very useful. Yes.
Quick thoughts to offer. So, I guess your question really was, Kapil, what is preventing us from being able to succeed with disruptive innovations, right? I think Professor Gurumurthy kind of captured what I had in mind in that, we don't have to play follow the leader just because somebody is leading in some perceived space. Let's first figure out whether that is relevant to us, right? I mean, and see whether we should, if it is very relevant to us, then fine, right? It's okay to play follow the leader. But if it's not, to heck with it, right? Why should we do that? Solve problems of here and now, and also solve problems that are large at our scale. Automatically, that will become disruptive. Automatically, there is no question about it, right? So maybe I'll stop there.
Yeah, thanks. I'll do one last question, I think, because we're already way over time. To this question, I think that has come up a few times around talent density in the country, right? And it seems like we have low. Plus, we also have the unfortunate problem that institutions in our country have to compete with the rest of the world for talent that is coming even out of our own institutions, right? From our own IITs and other places. How do you think, what do you think needs to happen in our ecosystems to try and retain more of that talent? What kind of opportunities do we need to create? What's the role that both academic institutions in our country, research labs, others can play to try and create more talent density within the country? Yeah.
No solution.
Yeah.
The short answer is we need to have more private research institutes. Somehow we need to set them up, because that provides. So one anecdote I'll share, right? Professors from IIT, when I talk to them, they say that students don't look up to research because they don't see great jobs that are available, right? Instead, they see great jobs in finance and other places. So I think if we can stand up private research institutions that are tackling hard problems that students would obviously enjoy, but then are also paying them market rates for employing them, that seems to be the only solution, but I don't know how to do it. That may be.
So I would say this, right? So if you look, if your personal budget is not balanced, you can do two things. You can either save more or earn more. We just need to earn more. Why are we worried about who is leaving? See, we are worried about who is leaving because we have nobody left behind. If we create it, look at China. China basically supplied, and this is China and India together, but it's a smaller portion, especially in the fields that at least I know of. China supplied for the sort of a scientific revolution in two countries, its own and partly the US. So, I mean, and they don't crib about it. What they did is they tried so if you go to a Chinese university, they have two tiers, right? You can choose to be on I don't know what the correct word is, but a domestic tier where you teach, you don't publish, you don't have to publish much, you don't require, but they pay you a little bit less. If you do, then you have to publish, you have to compete. If you're an economist, don't worry about what China is doing to solve the data problem. You do what you are expected to do. So what I'm saying is that I agree with them. I don't know what the solution is. I do think that we don't spend enough on education, for sure, right? Because if you think about the funnel is not just for talent too, you have a funnel, right? I mean, you're going to start from schooling. You need that to be good. You're going to go to some post-secondary and tertiary education. That's where we need to focus on. I mean, so if you don't, for example, get good students out of schools, you're not going to create that talent. And it is always going to be a funnel, right? Education is going to be a funnel. So I would just say that we just create more people. Why are we worried about people leaving? Just have more of them, right? So that's one thing we do have. There's like 1.4 billion of us, right? We'll be more. So why not? Sorry.
Yeah, that's. I think there are both. I guess we need both, right? We need investments in education. Yeah, but we need to try and retain talent. Yes.
There is one thing where we do allow competition. It's for talent.
Yes.
Unfortunately, it's so difficult to. So one final project, I'm reading something on the way here on the airport. But Intel is obviously not doing very well now with NVIDIA. And the Peter, I don't know last name, but he was in interview and he said that the last 15 years we were not led by technologists and we lost out because we didn't invest in R&D, right? Which of our established companies, Indigenous established companies across sectors, has ever had to innovate to stay in the market? We don't, and this is, there is no point being politically correct about this. You don't expect your companies to innovate. The profit to equity ratios in India are the highest in the world. It would seem we are being run by the best managers in the world. But that's not the case because there's no competition. So we do have some very basic problems. We can sit and talk about them, but these cannot be solved by individuals. We have some innovations at social scale, I think, need to take place in the way we think about establishing our economy and what we want to prioritize, how we want to do this. So one of the things that we have done well is this technology mission. I think that's great. But we do have non-technology problems that we need to solve.
Only other point, I mean, just not to anything, but it's more subtle that, cricket, right? I mean, there will be players who make it because of other things, right? That happens. But someone who fails, will immediately be out. And that is something that is not happening in any of the other sectors in this country. And that's a problem. We can give it names, and deride it or praise it, but I think it matters to a lot of people who are good. J.N. Tata, he said this, that, about charity, that there is charity that has to do with a lot of the things at the bottom, which is fine. But there must be a charity also focused at the brightest in the country. The thing is that you should raise the floor, but you should also raise the ceiling. Otherwise, you'll have big knees. Right? So that's the problem.
I think you just pointed to a solution. Make the BCCI the government.
Great. I think we are on time. That's unfortunately all the time we have for questions. Oh, we do have more time? Okay. So I have a long list of questions. Excellent. So one of the questions, this is for Amit. So we've had over the last, I would say a decade, we've had some, not our Indian companies, but we've had multinationals set up research labs in India. In your opinion, having been in one for a while, what's your experience and what kind of insights can we, gather from the fact that we've had a decade, maybe a decade and a half of strong research presence in the country, and how should we think about that and see what we can learn from that in the context of our own institutions?
You mean setting up labs like that?
Yes.
Or I think the benefit that we have now is because of these multinational labs, we now have the people who have been that set up and they know how to essentially be a part of the lab and run it, the culture and so on. So I would say that's perhaps a positive. And these labs also collaborate. For example, Microsoft Research collaborates openly. I think most of our projects are open and we have professors from IISc, IITs and others who are collaborating with us. So in that sense also, I think over the years, the way of working, I think how things are in industry research, private research versus university, I think that exposure has also happened. So I think in that sense, maybe it's good that these labs have enabled people to come back who are doing good research. And I think the next step is then to think about, to create private labs, I think the talent density is present now, I think compared to 10 years back. But other problems, I think the social and the financial problems, I think those are harder.
Great. I have one other question for Chini. So, in the kinds of institutions that you've seen, and this is also to you, Professor Gurumurthy, how do you encourage? I mean, I think there's always this criticism around the level of risk taking and the appetite that we have in the country. How do we encourage the research talent that we have in the country to be more ambitious, to set long-term, more risky goals? It's something that we are good at frugal innovation, but I would say that I don't think we are generally thought of as very, very, very risk-taking, at least in terms of our scientific endeavors. I think CBR is leading the way in some ways because, putting money where there is very high risk. As you said, CBR might fail, but it's still worth the investment, right? So in general, how do we encourage more risk-taking, both in academia and in our private sector?
So, I read a very interesting quote very recently I don't know who it is attributed to, and it kind of I think aligns with the question of risk and toughness of problems, or whatchamacallit, right? Who said this? I forget. Don't pick up a problem that you can solve. Pick up a problem that you can't right now and grow into the person who can solve it. Okay, so that is this attitude of saying it doesn't matter how tough the problem is, and if I don't know anything about it right now, I'll be damned if I don't sit and spend years, if needed, learning about it and do something about it. Now, that said, I mean, it's a nice highfalutin slogan and all, but you know, when the rubber meets the road, you know, people need money to survive, and so there is really no practical alternative to making it financially viable for somebody to actually take up such risks, right? So unless there are, you know, the Tata family of those days who decided to do the big, who decided to take up and solve the big problems, and you know, recent efforts like what Chris Gopalakrishnan as an individual is doing, and hopefully some other deep-pocketed people will also take up those kinds of efforts to do things, right? Eventually, I don't think there is really a lack of appetite on the part of people, you know, in India to take up big problems. They just feel that if they take it up, where is their next meal going to come from? Eventually, that is the most basic problem that we have to solve somehow.
Just have one thing. You know, this is kind of a paradox if you think about it, because I think a huge part of our country actually lives the riskiest lives you can see anywhere on the planet. It's true, because if you're living monsoon to monsoon, which a lot of country is, I mean, that's the riskiest life in terms of your, you know, and life, not forget finances. So, and then but they survive. Now, I don't think that's a great thing to live like that, but we do that. So to me, I think it's and then to say that we are not, so I think the individual capacity for risk is probably limited. All these risks are on different dimensions. You know, health is different than income, so it's not like you can collapse them onto one scale, but I think just our capacity to be able to take risk is limited. And I think the way to therefore promote this is to, you've got to de-risk the environment. Basically, you've got to make sure that failure doesn't result in you. See, right now, as a 45-year-old, if I don't have something coming in, it's very difficult, right? So I can't, if I had a startup, it shut down, it would be really difficult if I didn't have the finance, you know, some egg nest to go back to. So I think that we need to do that. And that again is something that can be done to an extent financially by the government, meaning as a society, so we can have these, you know, unemployment insurance and pensions and so on. We can't have them now. They have to grow with the growth of the country. And maybe culturally. So we had done this thing in Kerala 5 years ago. We worked with this Kerala startup mission. So they asked us to go talk to people and see what they could do to for the startup ecosystem. And almost everybody said the same thing, that, you know, you talk to them for 10 minutes and after that they'd start saying, my parents scold me. You know, they say, go to Dubai, your brother is in Dubai, why are you sitting here? Now, unfortunately, the truth is that not everybody can play for the Indian cricket team. So you've got to make sure that if you don't play for the Indian cricket team, you've still got to be able to survive. That, to me, is a challenge we can only solve socially. It's not a governmental problem, but it is a social problem. So, yeah, I mean, we've got to do that. Otherwise, it's going to be difficult. And these are not wrong. Individually, again, these people are not wrong. So, we've got to make allowance for the fact that we won't have superstars. That's what characterizes a superstar. And somebody asked, how do we measure innovation? I think, just one last one, I think we all measure, our understanding of innovation is superstars. When I ask you what are innovative companies, you'll say Google. But if you keep measuring something by its superstars, obviously you're going to keep thinking we are doing very bad because you all have. So you can survive without superstars too. So you can be Steve Waugh's team, right? You don't have to be, I don't know, Bill Richards for West Indies or something. You can be Australia, right? Just fight it out.
Yeah, and I think that reminds me of this interview. I think the Gopi Chand was giving once around the ecosystem of badminton players in the country, and he was mentioning this, that the number of players who succeed at the very top level, the superstars, is very small compared to the overall population of people who are risking taking up badminton as a sport. And the problem is that only those top few end up making a career out of a sport, but the others still need to survive, right? Because they've spent their life, trying to play badminton and trying to reach that goal. And unless you create that ecosystem, you are not going to have a funnel. And I think that's a very, very valid point. Yeah.
Sorry. Actually, I was going to start with that. And it's a good point you make, because I think Rahul Dravid said this once, that if you keep the metric of scoring 40 runs or above in an innings as success, even Sachin Tendulkar fails, because he has done that less than 50% of the appearances that he has got. So I think that is one thing that we must teach. The other two things that, I think is that, whether it is charity funding or it is about money, right? The pap smear, right, when it was first proposed by the person, Charles, something or the other, I think, everybody thought it's not going to work, right? But it so happened that they got some, philanthropic funding to sustain that, right? And today it is saving lives, right? The same with dwarf wheat, right? Norman Borlaug was working in Mexico. Nobody knew about this. Nobody knew what it is going to do, and they, probably made fun of him, right? That what is he working on? But it turned out that there was a foundation that thought there is value. The guy is smart. We will support, and it saved India and the whole subcontinent here. So I think that is one element that is there, and that brings me to the second one. We as a country are compared to the elephant, right? But we lack one attribute of the elephant, which is patience. We think that I'm going to hit a six of every ball. Again the analogy to cricket, right? You can do a lot with singles and twos, right? It takes time, and like I told you, 40s he started working, 1940s, and finally it found success in 1960s. Right? So some of these things, I think, it has to be ingrained. One last example, when we were grad students in the US, right, every student who would go there, they'll find an apartment and buy three things, a clock radio, a toaster, and perhaps a broken TV. And they would all buy from this company called Lucky Gold Star. It was the most El Cheapo of products, and it was designed to work only till you graduate. And then you can go buy the Sonys and other things of the world. But today, right, Lucky Gold Star is LG. Same company, the kind of products they make. Right? So it is progression, and we cannot, give up because, where we are today doesn't mean, we cannot get there tomorrow. So some of these attributes, I think we will have to get from somewhere, the patience and the confidence that, hamara din bhi aayega, so.
Time and money are non-negotiable.
Great. On that very, very positive note, I'd like to thank all the speakers for their time, the effort, and the thoughts that you've shared with us. I can see that I think there's many people thinking about this problem, and I'm sure in the next few years, we'll see hopefully the kind of social, political, and other reform that needs to create the next round of innovation from the country. So thanks again, everyone, for this amazing time.